So I recently went through something that still feels unreal when I replay it in my head. It began with a sound that didn't belong in a quiet neighborhood like ours. The kind of sound that makes your chest tighten before your mind even catches up. A pounding at the door, hard, deliberate, the kind of pounding you only hear in TV crime shows right before they knock the whole thing off its hinges. Except this wasn't TV. This was my porch, my front door, my morning. I was standing in the kitchen, half awake, still wearing my old flannel robe and socks, nursing the first cup of coffee I hadn't even finished. The sun had barely lifted above the rooftops, spilling soft light over the cul-de-sac. The world outside was calm, but that pounding shattered it. Again, 3 heavy booms that rattled the glass panes, making me freeze with the mug halfway to my lips. "Daniel Walker," a voice barked through the wood, sharp, commanding, too loud for a street like ours. "Step outside now." My stomach sank. Whoever was out there wasn't just knocking, they were announcing themselves, staking a claim. I glanced at Sarah, my wife, who had just stepped into the hallway, tying her dark hair back in that neat, practiced way she always did, like she was preparing for something. Her eyebrows rose ever so slightly as if to say, "What now?" I set the mug down on the counter and moved toward the door. Through the narrow window at the side, I caught flashes of dark blue fabric, the kind of color you'd expect on real uniforms. 4 men stood in formation, 2 in front, 2 in back, blocking the porch like they'd rehearsed it. Tactical pants, black boots, sunglasses hiding their eyes, even though the morning light was still weak. The words printed in big block letters across their backs made me blink. HOA Inspector. I almost laughed, almost, but there was nothing funny about the way they carried themselves. Cheap polyester or not, in the early morning haze, it might have fooled someone. And then I saw him, Greg Morrison, my neighbor from across the street. Except this wasn't the Greg who used to wave politely from his driveway. No. This was Greg with a dark ball cap pulled low, wraparound sunglasses, and that smug half-smile I'd grown to hate. "Step aside, sir," Greg said, his voice dripping with fake authority. "We have official reports of a code violation and a potential security breach. Your wife needs to come with us for questioning." For a moment I just stared, questioning by the HOA. Behind Greg, one of the so-called inspectors shifted uncomfortably. Another glanced down the street like he was worried someone was watching, and they were. I spotted Mrs. Jenkins' curtains twitching down the block. Sarah stepped forward then. Calm as ever, dressed in her dark gray workout jacket, fitted black pants, that same steady composure she wore like armor. "Do you have a warrant?" she asked, her voice smooth, even polite, but carrying steel underneath. Greg faltered, just a fraction of a second, but I caught it. What?" "A search warrant, an arrest warrant, any legal documentation whatsoever," she pressed, tilting her head. "Or are you just out here playing dress-up this morning?" One of the men coughed, covering a laugh. Another turned his head, embarrassed to even be standing there. Greg's jaw tightened, his hand brushing the pistol strapped to his hip. My throat went dry. The holster looked professional enough, but I'd seen real sidearms before. This wasn't standard issue. Sarah didn't flinch. She squared her shoulders, her eyes locked on his, her tone sharper now. "Daniel," she said without looking at me, "why don't you call the sheriff's office and ask for the duty sergeant? Tell them we have 4 men impersonating officers on our porch." Greg sneered, his voice lowering into a growl. "You're making a big mistake." Sarah's eyes never wavered. "No, Greg, the mistake is yours." For a long moment, the only sound was the low hum of an air conditioner down the block. Then came the faint click of a camera shutter. Someone was taking pictures. The whole neighborhood was starting to wake up. And standing there, coffee cooling on the counter behind me, I had no idea that this was just the first domino. The beginning of something that would tear apart the quiet life we thought we'd built here. What started as a neighbor in a fake uniform would drag us both into something far darker than a petty dispute. Everyone thinks they know their neighbors. That's the illusion of a quiet suburb, tidy lawns, friendly waves, block parties under strings of warm lights. but you don't really know someone until you've seen them under pressure. And in Oakwood Heights, it didn't take long for masks to slip. 2 years earlier, mornings like this would have sounded absurd. Men in fake uniforms pounding on our door, no chance. Back then, Sarah and I were chasing something simple: peace. A home where we could breathe. After a decade in the city, worn down by traffic and deadlines, we wanted a neighborhood that felt safe, predictable. Oakwood Heights looked like that dream on a real estate brochure: tree-lined streets, kids riding bikes until dusk, neighbors who waved from their porches. And at first, it delivered. We moved into a craftsman-style house at the end of a cul-de-sac, big enough for my tools and Sarah's workouts. We hosted a barbecue, met the folks next door, even developed a habit of evening walks around the loop. For a while, it felt like a second honeymoon. That's when Greg Morrison entered the picture. Tall, clean-cut, mid-30s, with a police cruiser parked out front like a silent guardian. He introduced himself as both a local officer and the neighborhood safety chair for the HOA. I didn't know if that was a real title, but he carried it like a badge. In those early weeks, he was the picture of helpfulness. Fixed a leaking pipe in my garage, complimented Sarah's landscaping, introduced us at a cookout as the model couple. People said we were lucky to have him on our street. And for a while, I believed it. But the first crack appeared with something simple: a fence. Our old wooden one was falling apart, warped boards leaning like crooked teeth. We hired a contractor, pulled the permits, everything by the book. Sarah wanted privacy for her work-from-home security consulting. We chose iron fencing, 6 feet tall, well within city code. The day construction started, Greg's smile vanished. He began standing in his yard, arms crossed, watching the crew work like a hawk circling prey. His wife, Linda, suddenly avoided eye contact. One evening, Greg came to our door wearing a polo with a stitched-on badge, not quite police but close enough to send a message. "Mike," he said, "though my name's Daniel, he always called me Mike. Would you consider lowering that fence to 4 feet? It's blocking my view of the street." I explained politely about Sarah's privacy, about the permits. His smile tightened. As a representative of the HOA, I think we should prioritize harmony over individual preferences. It was the first time he wielded his HOA title like a weapon. I remember closing the door afterward, a small knot forming in my stomach. I told myself it was nothing, just a strong-willed neighbor, but that knot grew heavier. A week later, an envelope landed in our mailbox. Heavy paper, law firm letterhead, legal notice. Our fence violated HOA standards, fines of $500 per day if we didn't comply. I showed Sarah mid-workout in the backyard. She scanned the page once and shook her head. "They can't do this. We have permits. We're in full compliance." She spoke like she already knew every angle. Still, I called the firm listed. The receptionist was puzzled. "We don't represent your HOA. We've never sent a notice like that." My chest tightened. "So it's a forgery." "If someone used our name, sir, that's a federal offense." I hung up with my hands shaking. It wasn't a petty disagreement anymore. It was calculated. And Sarah knew it too. She didn't panic, but her silence spoke volumes. That night at dinner, she stepped outside between bites to take hushed calls. Tactical language slipped into her voice, clipped, precise. Not military exactly, but something close. I didn't ask. I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Meanwhile, the neighborhood shifted around us. People who used to wave crossed the street. A woman who once brought us cookies now turned away. Notes began appearing under our wipers, taped to the door, tucked into the mailbox. "We'd appreciate it if you worked with the community." Outsiders don't understand how good neighborhoods operate. Different handwriting, same message, pressure. Sarah collected each one in a Ziploc bag, filed them in her office. Calm, methodical, like she'd done this before. Greg wasn't satisfied with whispers. One Saturday, he staged what he called an emergency HOA meeting on the sidewalk in front of our house. 20 neighbors gathered, folding chairs and clipboards like it was a courtroom. Greg stood tall, gesturing toward our half-built fence. "This isn't just about aesthetics," he declared. "A fence this high could hide suspicious activities. I've conducted a background investigation on Sarah Walker. Her work is marked confidential. For all we know, we're living next to a threat to national security." Gasps rippled, people stepped back from us. My fists clenched at the window. "He can't do that," I muttered. "He can't just—" "Oh, he can," Sarah said quietly. But then she added, her eyes sharp as steel, "and he just made the biggest mistake of his life." I didn't understand it then. But I would. Because the next time Greg showed up, it wouldn't just be with rumors. It would be with men in fake uniforms, standing on our porch at 2 in the morning. Everyone saw the shift coming, though no one admitted it out loud. The air in Oakwood Heights grew heavy, like the neighborhood itself was holding its breath. Smiles dried up, conversations turned to whispers, and eyes flicked away when Sarah and I walked past. Greg had planted his seeds, and the gossip spread like ivy through every crack. The notes kept coming, taped to the front door, slipped under windshield wipers. At first, syrupy polite, "Please consider community harmony." Then harsher, "Outsiders don't belong here. Lower your fence, and maybe things will calm down." Different handwriting each time, but the same venom. Sarah gathered them all in neat bags, labeled, filed in a box in her office. She didn't rant, didn't panic, just cataloged every piece of paper like evidence in a case she hadn't named yet. One night, I caught her on the phone in the backyard, her voice clipped, deliberate. Not the tone of a wife talking to a friend, the tone of someone reporting, briefing. Words sharp enough to cut. Surveillance, probable cause, containment. I stood at the window, watching her silhouette against the porch light. And for the first time, I realized just how little I really knew about the woman I married. Meanwhile, Greg was stepping out of the shadows. He wasn't content to whisper anymore. He was building a stage. It started with late-night conversations in driveways. I'd look out the window and see him talking to neighbors, pointing toward our house, his voice low but his gestures wide. People nodded. Some frowned. A few crossed their arms like jurors weighing a verdict. Then came the knock at our door. Not pounding, not yet, but sharp enough to make me tense. Greg stood there in his dark polo with that stitched-on badge patch, arms crossed, smile paper-thin. "Evening, Dan. Just wanted to remind you about Saturday morning's neighborhood safety check. HOA protocol. Inspections to make sure everyone's in compliance." My jaw tightened. Is that an actual policy or something you just made up? He tilted his head, his smirk widening. "I think you'll find it's in everyone's best interest to cooperate. Refusing inspection sends the wrong message." That night, Sarah and I sat in the living room, the TV buzzing low in the background. Her eyes never left her phone screen, brow furrowed in concentration. "He's escalating," she said flatly. I leaned forward, finally noticed, "Saturday's not about safety, is it?" She shook her head. "It's intimidation. He's going to show up with his little crew and try to manufacture a violation. But that's fine." I frowned. "Fine, what do we do?" She looked up at me then, eyes steady, calm. "We let him come, and I'll be ready." Saturday didn't wait for the sun. At 2 in the morning, the power cut out. Every light in Oakwood Heights blinked off at once, leaving the street swallowed in unnatural silence. Then came the crunch of boots on gravel. Low murmurs, the metallic snap of a gate latch. My pulse hammered. I pulled back the curtain and my first thought was SWAT. 4 figures in tactical pants and boots, dark navy shirts with big white letters across their backs. HOA inspector. Clipboards tucked under arms, black ball caps pulled low, earpieces glinting in the moonlight. It might have looked comical in daylight. At 2 in the morning, it was chilling. 2 of them carried pistols at their hips. And Greg, front and center, held a flashlight like a weapon, sweeping it across our windows. The knock came sharp, booming through the silence like a judge's gavel. Bam, bam, bam. HOA inspection, Greg's voice barked. "Open up." Sarah was already at the top of the stairs. Fully dressed, shoulders squared, she didn't look surprised, didn't even look alarmed, She just said, "Stay here, I'll handle this." And the way she said it, it wasn't a request, it was an order. I followed anyway, heart thundering, pulse in my ears. She flipped the porch light on. The sudden flood illuminated the crew, every cheap thread of their fake uniforms, every twitch of nerves in their stance. Greg rested his hand casually on his pistol. Sarah unlocked the deadbolt but didn't open the door wide. Her voice was cool, measured. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Greg's smirk widened. "We've had reports of unusual activity. HOA protocol says we inspect immediately when there's a potential security issue." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "At 2 in the morning. "Some things can't wait," Greg shot back. "We can do this quick and easy, or—" "Show me the paperwork," Sarah cut in, sharp as glass. Greg blinked. "Paperwork?" "Yes, search warrant, HOA inspection order, anything with an actual signature on it." Her eyes didn't waver. "Or are you just here playing make-believe again?" One of the men behind him shifted uneasily. Greg." "Quiet," Greg snapped, his face darkened. "I don't need paperwork, I'm a law enforcement officer. This is my jurisdiction." Sarah tilted her head, curious, almost amused. "Your jurisdiction?" "That's right," he said, puffing his chest. "I've been keeping this neighborhood safe long before you moved in, and I don't need—" She opened the door a fraction wider, just enough for the porch light to catch the silver glint of a small pin on her jacket collar. "You're on my property at 2 in the morning, without a warrant, impersonating an officer, armed." Her voice was steady, low. "That's a long list of problems for you, Greg." His eyes flicked to the pin, then back to her face. His jaw tightened. "Don't try to intimidate me." "I'm not trying," Sarah said. "This is me being polite." The men behind him no longer stood so tall. One stared at his shoes. Another glanced toward the street like he was already planning his exit. Greg pushed forward, trying to salvage control. "Step aside, Sarah. I need to make sure there's nothing dangerous here." Her voice dropped, calm but final. "Greg, if you cross this threshold, you'll be trespassing, and you'll leave here in the back of a real police cruiser." The silence stretched, taut as a wire. His hand twitched near his holster. For a heartbeat, I thought he might actually draw. But then Sarah spoke again, still cool. "Daniel, would you mind calling the sheriff's office? Let them know we have 4 armed individuals impersonating inspectors at our front door." Greg's face flushed red, rage twisting his features. "You're making a mistake." Her eyes didn't blink. "No, Greg, the mistake is yours." Finally, one of his crew stepped closer, murmuring something in his ear. Greg hesitated, then stepped back, finger pointing at Sarah like a threat. "This isn't over," he growled. Sarah didn't move. "You're right, it's not, but next time you show up, you'd better have the real law behind you." They melted into the dark, disappearing down the block. 5 minutes later, the power flickered back on. I closed the door, turned to her, my chest still heaving. She stood watching through the window, calm, steady. "Who exactly are you?" I asked. She didn't answer, not yet, but her silence told me one thing. Everything I thought I knew about my wife was about to change. Everyone thinks they're ready for the truth, but the truth rarely arrives clean. It doesn't knock politely. It slips in heavy, reshaping the ground under your feet. That night, after Greg slunk back into the shadows, our house was quiet again, but not the comfortable quiet it used to be. No, this was a silence that carried weight. The kind that made the walls feel like they were listening. Sarah stood at the front window a long time, her eyes fixed on the street, her reflection sharp in the glass. I could still see the faint glow of flashlights as Greg and his crew disappeared between the houses. Finally, she turned, walked into the kitchen, and set a kettle on the stove. I followed, my nerves buzzing like live wires. "Sarah," I said, louder than I meant to, "what the hell was that?" She didn't snap back. She filled the kettle, set it on the burner, and let the hiss of flame fill the air. Only then did she look at me calm, composed. You've been asking yourself questions about me for a while now, haven't you? It caught me off guard. My throat went dry. What does that have to do with Greg showing up in the middle of the night with a fake SWAT team? Her eyes didn't blink. Everything. The kettle began its low rumble, steam curling upward. She rested her palms flat on the counter, leaned forward, and locked her gaze on mine. My name is Sarah Walker. I'm the elected sheriff of this county. The words hit harder than any pounding on the door ever could. Sheriff. I repeated it in my head, trying to make it fit. The woman I thought worked in private security. The woman who clipped her hair back in the mornings like she was just preparing for another Zoom call. Sheriff. I shook my head slowly, searching for something to say. You're telling me all this time. Yes, her voice was steady, not defensive. 15 years in law enforcement, 10 in the sheriff's office, elected last year. My chest tightened, and you never told me. I didn't tell anyone, she said quietly. Because when you hold this position, you make enemies. Not just loud neighbors like Greg, but people with real resources, people who play dirtier than you can imagine. The less they knew about where I lived, the safer we both were. The kettle began to whistle softly. I barely noticed. My hands gripped the counter behind me as I tried to process. I thought you were in private security, I whispered. That's what I let people think, a cover. Sometimes lies keep people safe. I looked at her differently then. All those little habits that never quite made sense, choosing the seat in restaurants with the clearest view of the exits, scanning faces in a crowd, memorizing license plates without trying. They weren't quirks. They were instincts, training. I swallowed hard. So Greg. Her jaw tightened. Greg is dangerous. He's not just a nosy neighbor with a grudge. He's impersonating law enforcement. That's a felony. The stunt tonight, armed trespass. If I wanted to, I could have had them face down on the lawn in zip ties before the lights came back on. She said it calmly, not a boast, a fact. Why didn't you? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Her eyes softened just slightly. Because I needed to see how far he'd go, and now I know he's willing to escalate, which means he'll make a mistake, one I can use. She turned off the kettle, poured hot water into 2 mugs. Then, with a practiced motion, she reached into her jacket and pulled out a small digital recorder. She set it on the counter between us. I had this running the whole time, she said. Every word Greg said tonight is on here. I stared at the device, realization dawning. She wasn't just reacting to Greg, she was building a case. She'd been ready for this. What's his deal, Sarah? What's he really after? She leaned back, the steam from her mug curling around her face. I don't know yet, but men like him don't put on fake uniforms and build fake power structures just because they don't like offense. There's something bigger in play. Her lips curved into a faint, dangerous smile. And now he's my case. The next morning, she didn't waste a second. By the time I came downstairs, Sarah was already at the dining table, laptop open, notepad beside her, coffee untouched. Her posture was all business, focused, sharp, the same look I imagined she wore in a command center. Morning, I said groggily. You start early. Greg Morrison doesn't exist, she replied, eyes still locked on her screen. The words jolted me awake faster than caffeine. What do you mean? I mean he's not a sworn officer anywhere in California. He's not in county records. He's not even a registered security guard. There's no Greg Morrison. She pulled up property records, revealing the deed for his house wasn't even in that name. Gregory Mitchell. And that's when the hits came. Prior arrests. Impersonating police in Arizona. Harassment in Nevada. Fired from multiple security companies for abuse of authority. Civil lawsuits, intimidation, stalking, false reports. My blood ran cold. And now he's here, living across the street from us. Sarah nodded, her voice steady. He's been moving state to state for years. Starts friendly, gains trust, then uses it to take control. In some cases, he's taken over HOAs completely. This isn't about offense, Daniel. This is about control and money. She switched tabs, pulling up shell company filings tied to Mitchell. And there was another name, Victor Hale, a real estate investor with a history of scams, especially targeting military families. He pushes people into selling under pressure, Sarah explained, then flips the property through one of his companies. Mitchell's the enforcer, the intimidation, the face people see. I rubbed my temples, the weight of it sinking in. So what now? Now, she said, reaching into her bag to pull out 3 small black devices. We gather evidence. They were cameras, motion-activated, night vision, audio-capable, professional grade. You just had those lying around, I asked. She gave me a look that said, you already know the answer. By afternoon, they were installed, one hidden in the maple tree, aimed at the street, another tucked under the eaves above the garage, a third inside, positioned to catch anyone at the door. That evening, Sarah sat me down. Her voice was calm, but her eyes burned with determination. Here's the plan. We let Greg think he's winning. We don't react to the little stunts. But when he overreaches, and he will, we'll have him on tape. Her lips curved again, not in fear, but in something far colder. He has no idea the rope he's giving me to hang him with. Everyone thought Greg was the one running the game. He strutted around Oakwood Heights like he owned it, flashing his fake authority, puffing up his chest at every chance. But Sarah understood something deeper. People like Greg can't resist 2 things, attention and opportunity. Give them just enough of both, and they'll expose themselves. The morning after she uncovered his real name, she was already building what she called the net. She didn't explain it to me at first, just moved with that quiet, methodical precision, her coffee untouched as she typed. She started with the HOA group Greg had been pushing on everyone. He said it was for safety updates, neighborhood alerts. In reality, it was his stage, his way of keeping eyes and ears fixed on him. Sarah rarely used it before, but now she posted a carefully worded message. Heads up, everyone. We've been asked to temporarily store some equipment for a county training exercise. Nothing to worry about, but the delivery truck may arrive late at night. Please don't be alarmed if you see activity in our driveway. Short, official enough to sound real, vague enough to spark curiosity. By afternoon, the bait had been taken. Someone, almost certainly Greg, screenshotted the message and forwarded it to others. That evening, our hidden garage camera picked up Greg packing the sidewalk across the street, phone pressed to his ear, eyes locked on our house like a predator stalking prey. Sarah watched the footage later, a small smile curling at her lips. Step 1 complete. The next night, she raised the stakes. Using her sheriff's office credentials, she crafted a mock inventory list, nothing classified, nothing real, but full of jargon that sounded technical enough to pass for legitimate. She left the document open on her laptop, angled just right so the glow was visible through the front window. Then she adjusted the blinds, just enough for someone snooping to catch a glimpse. I frowned as I watched her stage it. Isn't this a little theatrical? Her eyes glinted. Theatrical works on people who need a story to justify their actions. It didn't take long. By dawn, the maple tree camera caught Greg standing on our lawn, angling his phone through the glass, snapping pictures of the screen. Sarah downloaded the footage, labeled it, filed it neatly into her growing archive. Step 2 complete. That night, she called someone she introduced only as Rodriguez. His voice came through the speaker, gravelly but sharp, a man used to dealing with problems that hid in shadows. Later, I learned he was a retired FBI agent she'd worked with on joint operations. Your guy's still active, Rodriguez said. Name, Victor Hale. Been moving property through straw buyers for years. Mitchell's one of his enforcers. Intimidation, impersonation, pushing families out so Hale can swoop in. Sarah's pen scratched quickly across her notepad. Do you have enough to charge him? Not yet, Rodriguez admitted. But if you can bridge the fake cop act to hail shell companies, we'll have federal charges. Wire fraud, conspiracy, serious time. Sarah leaned back, eyes narrowed. Then we give him something he thinks he can use and see where it goes. For the next 2 days, she built the rest of the trap. A fake memo, printed on letterhead, addressed to herself Sheriff Sarah Walker. It mentioned a high-value asset relocation and county tactical training division. Nothing sensitive, but vague enough to sound important. She left it in our unlocked mailbox, the way you might leave an envelope you're too careless with. By nightfall, it was gone. The next morning, the garage camera captured Greg in his driveway with a man I didn't recognize, tall, dark jacket, silver SUV idling nearby. They passed the paper back and forth, pointing toward our house. Sarah zoomed in on the license plate, her jaw tightening. "That's Hale's car," she said. "He's here." My stomach dropped. This wasn't just Greg anymore. The puppet master had stepped onto our street. That evening, Sarah posted once more in the HOA chat. Just one line. "Reminder, due to upcoming training equipment delivery, please keep driveways clear. Arrival time is classified but within the next 72 hours. Within 20 minutes, the maple tree camera caught Greg packing again, phone glued to his ear. His voice carried enough for the mic to catch. "You sure it's worth something?" "All right, I'll take care of it. We'll get them out before the delivery date." Sarah muted the clip, replayed it twice, then looked at me with a glint of cold satisfaction. That's exactly what I needed. But later that night, at dinner, the weight of it hit me. I put my fork down, my appetite gone. What happens if this blows back on us? What if they figure out you're baiting them? Sarah leaned back in her chair, her face unreadable. Then we moved to step 3. I hesitated. What's step 3? Her lips curved into a faint, cold smile. Public exposure, the kind you don't come back from. I didn't press her for details. Part of me didn't want to know. But deep down, I understood she wasn't just protecting us anymore. She was preparing to take Greg down in front of everyone. And in a neighborhood built on appearances, there's nothing more dangerous than losing your mask. Everyone knew something was coming. You could feel it in the way neighbors lingered at mailboxes a little too long, whispering in pairs, glancing nervously at our house. Greg had been strutting for days, puffed up with his false authority, his voice carrying across driveways like a preacher warming up for Sunday service. He wasn't satisfied with shadows anymore. He wanted a stage. And Sarah knew it. "He's going to call a public meeting," she told me one morning over coffee, her tone certain, almost casual. "It's how men like him cement control, get everyone in one place, frame the story his way, and force them to pick sides." She wasn't wrong. That afternoon, a flyer appeared in our mailbox. Bold letters across the top. Emergency HOA gathering community dispute resolution. Strongly encouraged attendance. Saturday, 4 p.m. right in front of our house. I held the paper in my hands, bile rising in my throat. "It's bait," I muttered. Sarah leaned against the counter, sipping her coffee. "It's an opportunity. He thinks this will be my humiliation. Instead, it'll be his." Saturday came hot and bright, the kind of afternoon that made the asphalt shimmer. By 3:30, folding chairs were lined up in a half-circle on the grass strip. Nearly 30 neighbors had gathered, more than I'd ever seen for an HOA event. The mood was restless, uncertain. People glanced at us, then at Greg, then back again, as if weighing which way the wind would blow. Greg arrived with all the swagger of a man convinced the neighborhood belonged to him. Crisp navy polo, fake badge clipped to his chest, aviator sunglasses reflecting the crowd. 2 of his so-called inspectors flanked him, clipboards in hand like props in a courtroom. "Thank you all for coming," he began, projecting his voice with practiced authority. "We're here because certain residents have refused to comply with community standards. This isn't personal, it's about safety, about protecting Oakwood Heights." He gestured toward our fence like it was Exhibit A, 6 feet tall, iron bars, blocking sight lines from the street. "It creates blind spots. A security hazard in my professional opinion. A murmur rippled through the chairs. Some nodded, others shifted uncomfortably. Greg stepped closer to the center, his voice rising. And that's not all. My investigation has revealed that Sarah Walker is engaged in activities that raise serious concerns for national security. Her work is classified. Her presence here is a threat we cannot ignore. Gasps broke out. A woman clutched her husband's arm. Someone whispered, "I knew something was off." And then Sarah stepped forward. She wore a simple black blazer over a blouse, her hair tied neatly back. No badge visible, no gun, just calm presence, steady and unshakable. And the moment she spoke, the noise died down. "Greg," she said evenly, "before you go any further, I have a simple request." He blinked. "What's that?" "Show us your police identification number." The crowd shifted, uneasy. Greg let out a short laugh. "That's sensitive information, I can't just hand it out." Sarah's tone never changed. "Every sworn law enforcement officer in this county has a badge number. It's public record, providing it is routine." Greg's jaw clenched. "Like I said, I'm not obligated." Sarah turned, gesturing toward a folding table set up behind her. On it sat her laptop, connected to a portable projector. With a few clicks, the screen lit up, casting the official county roster of active law enforcement onto a portable screen. She scrolled deliberately. "As you can see," she said clearly, "there is no Greg Morrison in this county, or anywhere in California." Gasps turned into a low roar of murmurs. She clicked again, pulling up another document. "Here's a receipt for a fake police badge purchased from an online costume supplier, shipped to 742 Elmwood Drive." She looked straight at him. "Your address, 8 months ago." Greg's face flushed crimson. "That's fabricated." Sarah didn't raise her voice. She simply clicked again. The screen switched to a still image from our garage camera. Greg, crouched near our window at dawn, phone out, snapping photos of her stage training list. Gasps grew louder, chairs scraped. "And this," she added, pressing play. Greg's voice came through the speaker, recorded 2 nights earlier on our front yard mic. "We'll get them out before the delivery date." The crowd erupted. Neighbors twisting in their seats, whispering, pointing. His inspectors stiffened, eyes darting toward the street like they wanted to vanish. Greg's composure cracked. He stepped forward, his voice rising, desperate. "She's twisting things, you don't understand, she's the threat here." Sarah raised a hand, her voice cutting clean through the noise. "What we understand is that you've been impersonating an officer, trespassing, working with known real estate scam artists to target families in this neighborhood." The crowd broke into shouts and questions. Greg's inspectors shifted nervously, clipboards drooping in their hands. Greg jabbed a finger at Sarah, his voice shaking now. "You think you can make a fool out of me? You have no idea who you're dealing with." Sarah's eyes didn't blink. "No, Greg, you have no idea who you're dealing with." The tension was so thick you could taste it. I saw Greg's hands twitch, his weight shift, the movements of a man about to do something reckless. Sarah must have seen it too, because her posture subtly changed, guarded, ready. And then, with a sudden sharp motion, Greg's hand dropped to his belt. Fingers curled around the grip of his pistol. A scream tore through the crowd. "Gun!" Chairs toppled. Neighbors scrambled back, phones flying into the air to capture it all. And in that instant, I realized the trap Sarah had set wasn't just about documents and recordings. It was about forcing Greg to reveal exactly who he really was, not in private, not in whispers, but in front of everyone. The world seemed to slow. Greg's hand was on the pistol, his face twisted with rage, veins bulging in his neck. Around us, panic erupted. Chairs scraped against the pavement, neighbors stumbled backward, voices overlapping in frantic shouts. A woman's scream cut through the chaos like glass breaking. But Sarah didn't move, not an inch. Her hands stayed visible, calm at her sides, shoulders squared. When she spoke, Her voice carried over the panic, low but steady, somehow louder than Greg's shouting. "Greg, you just made the worst mistake of your life." Her tone wasn't bravado. It was final, like a judge delivering a verdict. Greg leveled the gun toward her chest, both hands locked on the grip. His voice shook, not with fear, but with fury. "Everyone shut up. You don't understand who she is. She's dangerous. She'll turn on you." Sarah took one step forward, eyes locked on his. "You're pointing a loaded firearm at an elected law enforcement officer in front of 30 witnesses, and on camera." Dozens of phones hovered in the air, recording, live streaming. Greg's eyes darted, his chest heaving. The weight of those lenses pressed on him like spotlights. "They don't know what's real," he spat. "They know enough," Sarah replied, "and you're out of time." It happened faster than thought. One moment Greg's finger was tightening on the trigger, the next, Sarah moved, a blur of precision. She shifted sideways, stepping inside his line of sight, her left hand snapping down on his wrist, her right clamping the barrel and shoving it skyward. Crack! The gun discharged, the sound tearing through the summer air, echoing off the houses. I felt the concussion in my chest, smelled gunpowder sting the air. Gasps and shouts rose, bodies ducked and scrambled. Before the echoes even died, Sarah had twisted the weapon from his hands, pivoted behind him, and hooked his arm in a lock that dropped him hard to his knees. In one fluid motion, she pulled a black zip tie from her blazer pocket and cinched his wrists behind him. 3 seconds, that's all it took. Greg Mitchell is self-proclaimed protector of Oakwood Heights, fake cop, neighborhood tyrant, was face down in the grass, spitting curses into the dirt while Sarah pressed her knee between his shoulder blades. The crowd was frozen, silent except for the heavy breathing of those who'd scrambled in panic. Then, slowly, the silence cracked. Someone began clapping, hesitant at first, then louder. Others joined, relief rippling through them like a wave. But Sarah wasn't smiling. Her voice rang out clear, commanding. "Greg Mitchell, you are under arrest for impersonating a police officer, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, and conspiracy to commit fraud." The words struck like hammers. Neighbors shifted, stunned, their eyes wide. Some looked at Greg in shock, others at Sarah with awe. Kids peered from behind parents' legs, their small faces lit with something that looked like admiration. Greg twisted under her hold, his face red, spittle flying. "You think this is over. You have no idea how deep this goes." Sarah didn't answer. She kept her weight steady, scanning the crowd, scanning the street, her instincts always 5 steps ahead. That's when I noticed it. 2 of Greg's inspectors, the ones who'd been standing with him moments ago, were gone. Slipped away in the chaos. She must have seen it too, because her voice cut through the air without looking up. "Daniel, call the sheriff's office. Tell them I have 1 in custody, 2 still at large, likely armed." I was already dialing, my hands shaking, adrenaline spiking. The dispatcher's voice on the other end grounded me, calm, precise, promising deputies on the way. Within minutes, the wail of sirens grew louder, swelling until patrol cars tore around the corner, lights flashing, tires crunching against the curb. Doors flew open. Deputies poured out, weapons raised, until Sarah identified herself and calmly handed over the confiscated firearm. Detective Maria Santos, compact with sharp eyes that missed nothing, stepped forward. One look at Greg on the ground, another at Sarah, and she nodded. "He's been on our radar. You just handed us probable cause gift-wrapped." The deputies hauled Greg to his feet, wrists bound, shoving him toward the back of a squad car. He didn't fight now, but his eyes burned, locked on Sarah like he wanted to set her on fire with his glare. As they pushed him inside, he twisted his head, spitting one last warning. "You were targeted, Walker, long before you moved here, and when they send someone else, it won't be me you're dealing with." Sarah's face didn't change, but I saw it, the hardening of her eyes, the flicker of something colder than fear. She knew he wasn't bluffing. The car door slammed, tires screeched. The convoy of sirens carried Greg away. Neighbors slowly approached, the tension draining into relief, into gratitude. Hands reached for Sarah, shaking, thanking, whispering words of admiration. For weeks they'd avoided us. Now they clustered around her, drawn by the strength they'd just witnessed. But Sarah didn't bask in it. She didn't smile, didn't raise her chin in triumph. She simply said, her voice firm but heavy, "It's not over, not until we know who they are." And in that moment, I understood she wasn't just talking to the neighbors. She was talking to me too. Her phone buzzed. She stepped aside, answering low, clipped. I caught fragments. "In custody, no, too still at large, confirm vehicle description." When she returned, her expression was unreadable, locked into that mask I'd seen before, the one she wore when she was already 10 steps ahead of everyone else. "That was Captain Rodriguez," she said. "He's sending a joint task force tomorrow. Greg's not a lone wolf. He's part of a bigger operation, and they've been trying to pin it down for months." The words chilled me. My mind replayed Greg's final warning. "You were targeted long before you moved here." If that was true, then none of this had been chance. Not the fence, not the notes, not even Greg. The neighborhood had thought they were watching a petty squabble play out. But the truth was far darker, and far from over. The sirens faded, but the tension lingered. Neighbors slowly returned to their homes, whispering to one another, phones still in hand replaying the videos they'd captured. Greg was gone, but his shadow remained heavy across Oakwood Heights. That night, Sarah spread documents across the dining table, property records, corporate filings, court dockets. Half I recognized from earlier in the week, half were new. Clean lines connected names to companies, arrows linking addresses to shell accounts. She tapped the flowchart she'd drawn, her voice steady. "This is how it works. Mitchell Gregg identifies a target family, usually military or law enforcement, disciplined, stable, property owners, people less likely to go public with disputes. He fabricates violations, uses intimidation, turns neighbors against them until the pressure forces a sale." She pointed to the next box. "That's where Hale steps in. He buys through one of his companies, flips the property for profit, then repeats in another state." I swallowed hard. How many times? Her eyes met mine. Confirmed evidence on at least 40 families across 6 states, likely double. The thought chilled me. This isn't just about money. No, her voice hardened. It's about influence. You can reshape who lives near military bases, near government facilities. You can decide who stays and who gets pushed out. By morning, the task force arrived. Captain Rodriguez, tall, broad-shouldered, silver streaking his temples, shook Sarah's hand like a man who'd been through more than one fire with her. "Sarah," he said, a rare grin breaking his stern features. "You just made my month. We've been chasing Mitchell for 3 years." He turned to me, his eyes sharp but kind. "And you, thank you for keeping records. That camera footage of the mailbox, gold." I glanced at Sarah. She gave me the faintest nod. Of course it had been part of her plan. The next 48 hours blurred together. Warrants were served on Greg's house and 2 other nearby properties linked to Hale's shell companies. Agents carried out boxes of files, laptops, even duffel bags stuffed with fake badges and uniforms. One detective showed Sarah a tablet recovered from Greg's office. Detailed notes on families, their incomes, their routines, even their children's schools. Sarah's jaw clenched. This isn't intimidation. It's intelligence gathering. The 2 inspectors who slipped away during the meeting were caught in a neighboring county. Both ex-security contractors with checkered pasts, pliable enough to be useful. Faced with evidence, they flipped fast. Their testimonies pointed straight at Hale. 2 days later, federal agents arrested him in Nevada, stepping off a private jet. By week's end, the story broke wide. Local stations camped on our corner. National outlets picked it up. They called it the HOA sting. Reporters shouted questions. Neighbors swarmed Sarah, hungry for reassurance. The sheriff's office wanted her front and center, and when she finally spoke, her words were simple. "No one, no matter their title or uniform, has the right to intimidate a community for personal gain. If something feels wrong, speak up. That's how you keep a neighborhood safe. Not fiery, not dramatic, just truth delivered steady as stone. It landed harder than any speech Greg had ever given. That night when the house was finally quiet, I asked the question still gnawing at me. So, is it over? She poured 2 glasses of water, slid one toward me. The operation? Yes. Mitchell and Hale won't see daylight outside a cell for a long time. The investigation will stretch for months, but their scheme is finished. I hesitated. And the other thing, when Greg said we were targeted long before we moved here. Her eyes didn't meet mine right away. When they did, her voice was softer. That's what keeps me up. If it were just the fence, he never would have pushed this hard. Someone wanted us gone, specifically. I thought about pressing her, but the look on her face told me she didn't have an answer yet, or maybe she had one she wasn't ready to share. 6 weeks later, Oakwood Heights felt like a different place. The sharp edge of fear had lifted. Neighbors waved again, stopped to chat, let their kids play in the street. The HOA board reformed, holding meetings in the community center instead of on lawns. Leadership rotated, finances were transparent, and one new rule stood unshakable. No one could hold a security title without legitimate credentials. A scar turned into armor. Sarah refused leadership, despite the nominations. Real leadership is about empowering people, not holding power over them, she told the crowd at the first reformed meeting. The line got a standing ovation, and later, printed on flyers for our first Unity Day barbecue. She did agree to teach monthly safety classes. At first 20 people came, then 40. By the 3rd month, we had to move them to the high school gym. She taught not just self-defense, but how to spot fake authority, how to document suspicious behavior so law enforcement could act. She told the kids, don't be paranoid, but don't be passive. They adored her. At Unity Day, they clustered around like she was a superhero in jeans and a ball cap. One boy asked if she'd teach him the move where you bend the bad guy's arm backward. She laughed, promised a safer version, then made him demonstrate the call for help, technique she insisted every child learn. Yell loud, name the threat, describe it. Watching her, I realized something. Greg had chosen the wrong target, but the right neighbor. She hadn't just ended his scheme. She strengthened the entire community. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset over our still-standing 6-foot fence, I asked, do you ever regret showing them who you really are? She sipped her tea, eyes on the street. There are times when secrets protect people, but sometimes the truth is the safest thing you can give them. Her gaze drifted toward the playground, where a bronze plaque now hung on the slide, paid for with funds seized from Greg's property sales. It read, "In honor of those who stand up for truth and protect the place we call home." Life began to settle, but reminders lingered. Subtle, like the postcard we received one morning, no return address, a picture of a quiet street in Virginia. On the back, just one sentence, "You stopped one of them, there are more." Sarah didn't show it to the neighbors. She filed it in her locked desk and called Rodriguez on a secure line. Or the night I woke to find her at the kitchen table, lit by the glow of her laptop, scrolling through a spreadsheet of names and addresses I didn't recognize. When I asked, she smiled faintly. Just keeping track. For the neighbors, the story had an ending, and it was a happy one. But for Sarah, endings didn't exist. Only chapters. One Saturday morning, I was planting bulbs along the walkway when a white van rolled slowly past. Nothing unusual. Delivery vans were common. But the driver lingered, eyes on our house a moment too long. Sarah stood in the doorway. She didn't wave, didn't frown. She just watched until it turned the corner, then locked the door. "Something?" I asked when I came inside. She hesitated. "Probably nothing, but I'll keep an eye on it." That was the thing about living with Sarah. Even when the street was quiet, she knew silence could be the pause before the storm. She would never stop scanning, never stop protecting. Because Sarah Walker, the woman Greg thought he could intimidate, wasn't just my wife. She was the sheriff of this county. And when she sets her mind to defending her people, she doesn't just win. She changes the battlefield. Every HOA has a story on HOA headaches. You'll hear the ones they tried to bury. Subscribe today.